is try to move intentionally to companies that use mixed model compensation. There was a point when I was in my early 30s where I was like, oh my God, I just crossed $100,000. And that to me, I was like, I'm rich. And it just meant I could pay my bills with a little bit less stress every month. And then I was thinking to myself as I was sort of plotting out my career, I'm like, if I go down to like, if I become an HR manager, an HR director, an HR VP, like the most I'm really going to make is 250 to 300,000. When you're at around 30, you can start to understand what finances mean. You're like, well, that's really good. I'm lucky because I can pay my bills, but this is, it's not exactly like I can retire and enjoy the world. But what changed that was understanding that to make moves to companies that don't just pay you in salary, but rather do additional types of incentives. So that's where I made a very intentional decision to go to Electronic Arts, because I knew that they had both a bonus as well as stock. And then that kept me in that space, because then I went to Spotify, who did the same. When you're working in compensation, especially, and the higher you go up, like when we're talking about job level, you can make very good amounts of money, especially at director level and above, because you're paid so well in that bonus and equity that is through, absolutely untapped capitalism. Whereas like your base will never get above a certain level. So my advice to everyone is to understand how that works. I'm not sure how that necessarily translates to other countries. But I do know that we offered our stock at Spotify to people outside the US, but to move to companies that don't just look at base for compensation.
How do we find that out? How do you candidates and job seekers, they're going to go to a website, they're going to look at the jobs available on a career page. Where do they find out that information?
So this is the thing that sucks. Companies do not have to disclose anything to the public about their compensation. It's highly protected. It's considered business intelligence. So companies in many cases are not going to necessarily advertise that. Generally, you will almost always find it though in larger companies. And then there are crowdsourcing sort of websites like levels.fyi. Glassdoor isn't necessarily the worst job for it. But you can go and say, hey, does this company do stock, or does this company do bonus for its employees based in France? Things like that.
Okay, cool.
That's really interesting. And it's also just great that you've explained that, Dan. I think mixed model compensation, just to know that in a negotiation, to know that in an interview, shifts what a candidate can ask, right? And coming from a position of knowledge about that upper echelon, or those final kind of couple of decades, the majority of your career, it's good to have that information. I think as long as you get past that, I got a job, thank goodness, what's next after that.